Hi folks, Congressman Jared Huffman here, and I believe that we are now live here on Facebook Live for one of my weekly or periodic online office hours. Thanks for joining me. The way these have gone is I just share a few thoughts off the top about things that I've been working on, and then we go pretty quickly right to your questions. So I hope you're thinking about some things you might want to discuss today. Go ahead and fire them off by way of comments to this Facebook Live, and I've got my District Director, Jenny Calloway, here in the office with me, monitoring those, and she'll just feed me questions as we go. We had a few arrive by email in advance of this, so I think we've got plenty to talk about. It seems like it's been an eternity, but actually it's been just a week since I was last with you, and I was coming to you from Washington because last week Congress was in session, and it was a pretty exciting week. We were able to pass a huge $1.5 trillion infrastructure package out of the House of Representatives. This is something that it seems like the whole time I've been in Congress, people have been talking about confronting our infrastructure backlog and doing something big on infrastructure. Everybody in this Congress has talked about it. It was one of the Democrats' big campaign promises. The For the People agenda, I think, had 3 or 4 elements. Infrastructure was one of them. President Trump has talked about it. In fact, I think he declared Infrastructure Week like 7 different times. But until last week, everybody has always found an excuse not to do it. Mainly because it's really expensive, but also because the politics have just not lined up. So the good news that I feel right now as your congressman is we did it. After years of talking about it, we threw out the excuses and we passed a really big package. The other reason I feel really good about that is a whole bunch of my stuff is in it. So I hope you'll allow me to just brag a little bit about some work product that I was able to get into that. The biggest, of course, is my water infrastructure package. We call it the Drought Future Act. And what I have done is rolled up just hundreds of millions of dollars of projects and investments in the right kind of water infrastructure that will help us be more drought resilient, and also good environmental stewards in the western United States. I have been working on water issues for many years, and we've just seen too many false choices. You got to choose between fish or farmers or the environmental laws or water infrastructure, and we know better. You can actually do right by the environment and have a better, more resilient water supply, and this package is chock full of really great programs and investments to do that. So I'm excited about that. Another of my bills will electrify the Postal Service fleet, which is going to make a huge difference. This is one of the biggest fleets in the world, certainly the biggest one in the United States, and they're still driving around our streets on these clunky vehicles from the late 1980s, early 1990s that get terrible mileage, that are falling apart, that have huge not only fuel costs but maintenance costs. And we need to modernize that fleet anyway. So a bill that I have been introducing these last few years called the Fleet Act is in that infrastructure package, and it calls for at least 75% of these new postal vehicles to be electrified. So we're going to go from maybe the worst and most embarrassing fleet in the country to the best, and that's pretty exciting. And then I have a bill to promote broadband internet service in underserved rural areas. And it would do that by using the co-location of federal land management agencies, which is a real opportunity often in places like Mendocino, Humboldt, other parts of my district. You don't have good broadband connection, but you do have a Forest Service office or maybe a national park or maybe a BLM facility or a federally qualified health center, all sorts of federal presence in these areas. And there just haven't been the authorities and the strategic plan in place to have those federal authorities use their own IT contracting needs to also solve problems for neighboring communities. And that's what this bill does. It directs them to actually partner with their neighbors, with other agencies, with Indian reservations, clinics, other things, to serve the entire broadband need of many of these areas. So it's a good strategic piece of public policy, and it's now advanced out of the House of Representatives. There's all kinds of other good stuff in that package as well, but those are just 3 of my own personal favorites that I'm especially excited about. Last thing I'll mention before we get to your questions, we rolled out the final product of our Climate Select Committee last week as well, and it is the first ever comprehensive economy-wide climate plan from the United States Congress. And I, of course, have been serving on the Select Committee for the last year and a half. We've been working really hard to develop this, and it's a great piece of work. I think you'll like it. I'm hoping that my staff can put up some links, so if you want to read the entire 500-page report, you can. That's a lot of pages. The reason it's so much is because our climate crisis touches every part of our economy, every part of our lives, and this is the first time that Congress has undertaken to look at all of it. So it's a really good piece of work. It will then, from here, inform a whole bunch of other bills that will start moving through the authorizing committees in the House of Representatives, and some of that has already begun. That infrastructure package I just mentioned to you was to some extent coordinated with the Select Committee and is very consistent with a lot of the goals and the programs that we call for. So those are a few things I've been doing this past week. Let's jump into your questions.
Okay, there are two questions here about San Quentin. Realizing it's a state issue, but it is our district and some action needs to be taken to stem the tide of infection and keep inmates and the broader community safe. What are you doing?
All right. So first thing about San Quentin is thank you for recognizing that it's a state prison. It is in a federal receivership because of its healthcare problems over many years, but that doesn't bring any federal agencies to the table. It just brings a federal judge and a receiver to oversee what is otherwise a state prison and a state prison healthcare system. Things were going pretty good at San Quentin right up until a few weeks ago when a terrible mistake was made by somebody in the state prison healthcare system. They decided to transfer about 122 inmates from the Chino facility, where they had had a terrible COVID outbreak, to San Quentin without any testing that was close in time to that transfer, and that was a really monumentally stupid thing to do. And we're paying the price for that right now, because I think this is a cautionary tale, especially in a congregate living setting like a prison. When you screw up and cause a whole bunch of people to be exposed and infected, it is very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube. That's what's been happening these last couple of weeks. And my staff and I have been tracking. In fact, I was on a long conference call with Cal OES and prison officials and California health officials and my state legislative colleagues yesterday. So we're staying on top of this, but this is going to have to be solved by those state authorities. And I will tell you, I'm somewhat relieved to see the progress of the last few days. They are standing up facilities on site at San Quentin to start segregating people and to start providing a lot of the healthcare needs that they'll have on site. They are looking very aggressively at low-risk prisoners who are toward the end of their sentence, who could be candidates for early release. And to the extent that some of these prisoners need to actually go to a hospital, they're looking broadly at the entire Bay Area and trying to distribute those hospital visits so that they don't overwhelm any one community like Marin County, where I live. And that was an immediate concern that a lot of folks in Marin had, because that outbreak at San Quentin could swamp Marin General Health, Kaiser, and the other facilities that we have in this community. So I feel like right now we're doing as well as we can. Assemblymember Levine and Senator McGuire have done a great job of taking this seriously, elevating it very quickly to the highest levels in the state, and I feel like we're getting the attention we need. The problem is, you know, the original mistake just put us in a very difficult spot, and we're going to continue to track it. If there's a federal role for me to play, I'm continuously listening for that. If they need the Corps of Engineers to come in and stand up some kind of a field hospital or anything like that, I stand ready to help, and that's why we're going to stay engaged with Assemblyman Levine and with Senator McGuire. But right now, I do feel like they're doing what we can.
Okay, so Rosina Wilson of San Rafael is asking, I'm a senior trying to apply for aid via the EDD's PUA program. I've been a freelance writer and editor for 35 years. I've lost a great deal of business due to the pandemic. The EDD's UI online portal appears to be malfunctioning. I can get through, then I can't get further. So how do I get some help? Who can help me with this?
Yeah, Rosina, you're not alone. We are continuously hearing from people that are unable to reach human beings at EDD, unable to get through their online portals, not hearing back after they submit their application for unemployment benefits. It is a royal mess. And unfortunately, because EDD is a state agency, my ability to pick up the phone and get them to elevate a particularly urgent case is non-existent. And I don't mean at all to duck this question, but the best thing I can recommend for you to do is to call your state legislators. So either your state senator or your assembly member. Looks like you're in Marinwood, so that's going to be either Assemblyman Mark Levine or State Senator Mike McGuire. They do have special liaisons at EDD, and they do have a certain number of cases that they can elevate and prioritize. I don't know if it's every day or every week, but they can do things I can't. And I would recommend that you reach out to them. Feel free to tell them I sent you. And I hope we can cut through the red tape. I'm sorry you're going through that.
Okay, Andre wants to know, why are gas prices so high behind the redwood curtain? I paid $3.79 per gallon for premium for my car. It seems as the distributor has if the distributor has a monopoly and can charge whatever he wishes.
Yeah, well, this is the age-old question. Certainly, behind the redwood curtain up in Humboldt County, prices are usually a little higher. That's because the gasoline has to be barged in. But it's not much cheaper down here in Marin, I promise you. And, you know, people have been looking at this for years. It has never really added up when you look at the state gas tax and the additional costs that we have in California. It still seems to me that oil companies are just charging us more because they think we can bear the cost. And it's another reason to try to be free of the shackles of the fossil fuel industry, in my opinion. Certainly from a consumer advocacy perspective, I will always be on the side of consumers against this kind of stuff, and I'll support any inquiries or studies to try to get to the bottom of it. But the real long-term solution is to try to relieve ourselves from that vulnerability. I just got my first all-electric car over the weekend. I'm kind of excited about it. I am excited about never having to refuel a vehicle on fossil fuel ever again. And the thing I found, you know, I was going through all the tax credits and rebates and things that are available now for EVs. What may have once been kind of a wealthy person's luxury, there are now some amazing, generous rebates and incentives for people way down on the income scale. In fact, they get far more generous the lower your income is. So if it's an option for you, I would suggest now's a great time to check out an electric vehicle. If not now, certainly over the course of the next year, you're going to see many more offerings. The rebates and the incentives, the tax credits are really generous right now. And so the economic case for it, I think, is better than ever.
Okay, switching to education, Leslie wants to know what can be done at the state level and yours to stop the student ban on international students. My college announced 2 months ago we will continue remote teaching in the fall with rare exception. Right now, faculty are trying to come up with creative ways to circumvent this.
So I believe this question is referring to something, you know, one of the many bombshells that President Trump has dropped in recent days. He is trying to get everybody to just pretend that this pandemic doesn't exist. And one of the ways he's going to do that is to punish international students who are studying at a college or university where they're not in person 5 days a week. So my understanding is he's threatening that if you have online education as part of your college or university, he's going to deport you, which is just amazingly heavy-handed. And the good news there is I think he can't do it. I don't think he has the authority to do it. I don't think he's complied with the Administrative Procedures Act. And just today I read that Harvard and MIT filed a lawsuit to try to overturn that threat or prevent that threat from taking effect. I feel pretty confident that they will prevail. But in the meantime, we got a president who loves to, who loves the bluster and the drama of those kind of things, and it's caused all sorts of fear and uncertainty in the immigrant community, which may be his ultimate goal here. So stay tuned. But no, the President of the United States should not be dictating those type of things. We should be leaving the safety of our schools and colleges and universities to the people who run them, in conjunction with actual public health officials who know what they're talking about, and they should work out the standards that will apply for either in-person or online learning, or some combination of that this fall.
And what about his threat to stop federal funding for public schools across the board? It's a follow-up question.
Yeah, so you're right. He did make some kind of a veiled threat that he would stop funding. He can't do that. I mean, let's just cut to the chase. That's not going to happen. Not a chance. So okay. We could talk more about it, but I promise you, President Trump cannot cut funding for schools that decide to use remote learning or a hybrid of remote learning.
Okay. So Allison's up in Humboldt, and she's wondering how COVID is looking across your district. It seems like it's ripping through states, and I don't want to be lulled into with a sense of lower numbers up here that things are safe. How does it look from where you sit across this district?
Sure. Thanks, Allison. So I think the latest information I've seen, and I get almost a daily readout from all 6 counties I represent, numbers are going up just about everywhere. Now, Trinity only has a couple cases, so you're not yet seeing anything there. Del Norte has a few more, but not many. But in Humboldt, Mendocino just had a big jump because a whole bunch of folks in one fire station in Leggett were found. There's a little outbreak there. And Mendocino has had some other outbreaks spread around the county. Sonoma numbers are way up. Just got off the phone with Dr. Mace, the public health official there this morning. And they are seeing, they predicted this, they anticipated it, but they've now been put on the watch list by Governor Newsom for the 2nd day in a row. They are likely to not escape that watch list. They're going to probably go into this cohort of counties that has to roll back some of the reopening they've done for events and for indoor dining and things like that. Marin County is in that category already. And we've seen our numbers going up. Even if you back out San Quentin, the numbers in Marin are on an upward trajectory. So that's the story. That's what's going on. It's not unlike what you hear about around the country. The difference is it's not as dramatic as Southern California or as Florida or Arizona. And as of right now, all of my information indicates that we have the hospital capacity and the resiliency to deal with this trend that we're on right now if it doesn't spin out of control. And that sort of brings us back to what we all need to do about it. We all need to keep making good decisions in our daily lives. There is this tendency to relax, and I think what's been going on around the country has hopefully been a wake-up call to all of us that we can't relax. We've got to keep wearing facial coverings. We've got to keep doing physical distancing, avoiding crowds. We got to maintain the hygiene. If we just do those common sense things, I think we're going to be able to get through this. But I am worried when you have the president and others just very much undercutting that common sense public health message. There's a lot of confusion out there. And I think it's really incumbent on all of us to model the right decisions and to urge everyone we know to do the right thing.
Yes, a follow-up, Amby wants to know what's being done about so many people dismissing orders. They act like it's simply a suggestion and they're free to ignore it. What about enforcement?
Yeah, enforcement's a good question. Enforcement happens at the local level, of course, and it can be, criminal enforcement. Nobody likes to go right to those heavy-handed things, but yeah, people who violate public health orders could be cited by a law enforcement official out there. Could be civil enforcement if it's an establishment, a restaurant, or something else that is violating orders, allowing people indoors. They're going to find themselves written up, and they might lose their license to operate or be fined. And we have seen a number of facilities in my district that experienced that. A restaurant in Mendocino County basically had to be closed down because they refused to comply with public health orders. So I think the enforcement is always going to be a continuum that should start with education and requesting voluntary compliance. But you're going to need that backstop of, more heavy-handed, stronger measures. If you know of a case where violations are taking place, you really should start by reporting it to your local authorities. And you should, see something, say something. You should call it out.
Margaret says, what about the World Health Organization? Since the Congress already appropriated money there, how can we really drop out? That would diminish our participation in the vaccine development or use. Yeah. It seems like a dumb move.
Well, I certainly agree. It's a dumb move. The good news there is it's a move that we should be able to prevent. The process of withdrawing from the World Health Organization takes a year. President Trump, as he is known to do with international agreements, dramatically announced he was pulling the United States out. But it takes a year to do that, and we have an election in November. So assuming that we have a different president, I'm confident that we'll be back at the table, part of the global community trying to tackle pandemics and other public health challenges with our fellow countries, as we should. We have to. We cannot go it alone with something like a global pandemic. So we'll leave it at that. I agree. It's a profoundly stupid and entirely political stunt by the president.
Okay, Dawn is asking, what is your position on special fuel blends in California? Are they necessary anymore, seeing we have better fuel mileage vehicles?
Yeah, so California has pushed the envelope to address criterion air pollution for public health reasons and clean air. But we're also pushing to do the next and most obvious thing, which is to get rid of fossil fuel entirely. So, I think for a while longer, we're going to need to do both. We don't want to just let go of those air quality standards until we're done with fossil fuel. But we certainly need to push aggressively to move to zero emission vehicles, which is the best answer of all. So I think California is doing that. We can do more. I can provide some support from the federal side. I won't get back on my electric car soapbox that I was on earlier, but it's a great time to look at electric vehicles.
Lamanda wants to know, what is your take on military sexual trauma?
So military sexual trauma is a real thing, obviously, and I guess my take is I've learned a lot from colleagues like Congresswoman Jackie Speer, who has made this a personal cause of hers, and I believe that we have to move the investigation and the review and the consequences for cases of sexual assault and sexual trauma out of the normal chain of command. It's a little bit like the story we hear with police abuse, where we haven't been able to independently hold bad cops accountable because you've got all these systems, these chain of command systems, and police unions who have been perhaps over-empowered over the years to shut down investigations and accountability. The same thing happens in the military. And so we're going to have to, I think, support mechanisms outside of the chain of command to make sure that every serious allegation of sexual assault in the military gets an honest look and that there's a chance for real consequences. And then we got to provide the support for the victims and the survivors of this trauma, which the military has been reluctant to do because they don't want to acknowledge the problem. So I'm really grateful to work with a colleague like Jackie Speer, like a bunch of other colleagues in Congress who have elevated this and refused to take no for an answer. And I think you'll see progress every year on this issue. In fact, we're just on the verge of the next defense authorization, and I'm sure that we'll be doing more in this year's NDAA to tackle this.
Okay. David wants to know, what are you and the Dem Party doing to prepare for Trump's resistance to leaving the White House after losing?
Yeah, well, a lot of us are concerned that there may not be a peaceful transition of power for the first time. I don't think it's something we've ever had to worry about before, but there are plenty of reasons with this president, some of which he has strongly hinted at, that make this not a crazy idea. I think the most obvious way to avoid that is to get out and vote and to try to shape the electoral outcome in a way that makes it very difficult for him to question the result. Other than that, it's about being lawyered up and ready to challenge dirty tricks and shenanigans, and all of that, I believe, is happening. So I think everyone needs to be vigilant. I feel better about this than I did a month or two ago, to be honest, because I have seen a number of senior military leaders stand up and make statements that indicate to me that they are on the side of the rule of law. I think we got to still be very vigilant, but when the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, acknowledges that he should not have been part of that stunt at Lafayette Square, that he is very mindful of the mistake he made that politicizes his role as a military leader, that's encouraging to me to hear. When General Mattis comes out with the kind of scathing criticism of this president that we saw a couple weeks ago, that's encouraging, because even though he is retired, a lot of people in the military establishment listen to General Mattis. He's a real trusted voice and a respected authority. So I think we're in the process of a lot of the key military leaders who Trump would need in order to steal the election. We're in the process of them putting out markers that they will not be part of that, and I'm encouraged by that.
Okay, Catherine wants to know, or Casey wants to know, are there any sort of updates regarding Californians getting more financial help beyond the $1,200 one more time with one more stimulus payment?
So this is about the individual stimulus payments. Most of you, hopefully by now, have gotten that $1,200. What is next? Well, we certainly called for another round of that in a bill called the HEROES Act that we passed out of the House over a month ago now. We're trying to put pressure on Mitch McConnell for the Senate to take that up. We still think that it is the best, most appropriate response to where we are, both with the pandemic and with the economic fallout. And we have begun to see some movement in answer to your question. In fact, just today, I saw that Senator McConnell said that he could support an additional individual stimulus check. Now, he specified that this would be for people making, I think, less than $40,000 a year. And his precondition has always been that it would need to be part of a deal that grants blanket immunity to businesses and industries from being sued because of the spread of the COVID-19 virus. That's bad policy, and I don't support blanket immunity. Giving away blanket immunity in return for such a small give on Mitch McConnell's part, too, would not be a very good deal. So I don't think we're there yet, but I think the fact that McConnell is even talking about that, we're hearing others in the administration acknowledge the need for more stimulus and another response. It shows we're moving in the right direction. Now, what is going to drive that to actually get another deal done? Well, at the end of this month, the additional unemployment benefits that we approved back in the CARES Act expire. And I think most people agree that that is one of the main reasons we have avoided descending further into economic chaos. It's one of the reasons the stock market continues to not even closely reflect the true degree of economic contraction we've had, because there's been money in people's pockets, and that unemployment has been a key part of that. If that suddenly goes away, I think there's going to be enormous pressure on people in both parties, in both houses of Congress and the administration, to step in and provide some relief to prevent that economic freefall. And that's where I'm hoping we can cut a deal that's something close to what we put together in the HEROES Act. So unfortunately, it may well be that there's a period where coverage lapses. We had one of the questions just today about somebody trying to get unemployment benefits at EDD, and they can't even get their phone calls answered, and that's happening all over California. If the benefits lapse and you've got that, that's a pretty bad situation. So we're going to count on our state officials to keep getting EDD sorted out so that they have the capacity to process claims and answer calls. My job is to try to make sure that I can extend those unemployment benefits so there's actual money there for these people after the end of this month. And I hope the combination of those things puts pressure on McConnell and Trump to cut a deal with us.
Sherry wants to know, do you think the HEROES bill could pass if some of the extra requirements were removed that are not directly related to COVID?
Well, it depends how you define directly related to COVID. The HEROES Act calls for a national testing strategy, which is very directly related to COVID. Everywhere I go in my district, I hear about how all of these promises about testing still haven't been kept. We're still waiting. I just heard from my Humboldt County public health director this morning. They're waiting 7 and 8 days to get test results. That makes it virtually impossible to do meaningful tracking and tracing when you get a positive test result, and that makes it very difficult to contain outbreaks. So testing is still just a complete disgrace in this country, and it's because we lack a national testing strategy. We call for that in the HEROES Act. We call for much greater investments in our healthcare workers and frontline workers and essential workers by providing hazard pay. Think about it. Schools are talking about reopening now, but teachers and staff are really worried about whether they're going to be safe. A lot of them are thinking twice about whether they want to show up. We're going to have a staffing crisis in our education system and at our colleges and universities. It's a classic situation where if you expect them to show up, it is totally appropriate to pay them a little extra hazard pay for being put into an environment where they're more likely to be exposed to the virus. That should apply to every type of occupation where people are asked to bear that kind of exposure for the greater good. So that's part of the HEROES Act. And then obviously you have the economic response in the HEROES Act as well, extending these programs like the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL loans and other things, the unemployment insurance, to reflect that this disease is not going away. It's going to be with us for many, many months, and we need those safety net programs to reflect the actual duration of this pandemic. So that's all in there. And then the support to state and local governments is really the linchpin of all of it, because the next wave of economic contraction is going to be the public sector. And that's going to cause all kinds of problems for services that we count on in our schools, in our public health facilities, public safety, all kinds of things, sanitation. We cannot afford to allow those local governments and state governments that provide those services to crash. So I would argue all of it is directly relevant and related to the pandemic. And I know that my Republican colleagues have characterized it differently. But I don't think there's anything in that HEROES Act that I couldn't make a strong case as being directly responsive to this crisis that we're in right now.
Time for 2 more questions?
2 more, let's do it.
Okay. So Catherine wants to know, where's California on mail-in voting for the fall election? How will we all be receiving ballots? And what about other states? Where is mail-in voting?
Yeah, so California is the good news story. We're all going to get a mail-in ballot, and anyone who chooses to vote that way can easily do so in California. Many other states have gone the same route. However, and you've seen this if you're following the news, the president has decided to try to undermine vote by mail. He suggested that it's ripe for fraud. The Attorney General is echoing some of this. And they are trying to get Republican states primarily not to do more vote by mail. And this is an interesting thing because just this week, the Center for Disease Control came out and recommended this fall that people vote by mail. So once again, you have this disconnect between the political agenda of this president and the Attorney General trying to discourage voting by mail and the public health reality of this pandemic, where you've got the president's own CDC telling people they should vote by mail. It's crazy. All I can tell you is that we're pushing the HEROES Act. Okay, here's another part of the HEROES Act that I think is responsive to the pandemic. We call for a national vote by mail program for this very reason. We call for support of the United States Postal Service for this very reason. You can't make sure those ballots are delivered and processed and counted if you don't have a postal service that's able to keep the lights on. So all of these things are very much tied up in either the public health or the economic aspects of the pandemic crisis we're living through. And the good news there is that I think most voters are interested in voting by mail, and we're going to have an opportunity to lead the country here in California.
Okay. So here's your last question. Vernon wants to know, in your last newsletter, you referred to the House of Representatives as the People's House. Why?
Yeah.
The proper name given by the Constitution was the former.
The People's. Why do I call it the People's House? Well, we're closest to the people. Okay, our districts are the most distributed, so we are. I represent 750 to 800,000 people. That's a typical congressional district. My two United States senators here in California, both of them represent 38 million people. So just by virtue of the intimacy of that representative arrangement, I'm closer to the people. Like it or not, senators, I'm closer to the people. But the other reason is members of the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years. And that was by design. Our framers wanted the House of Representatives to be on a short leash, to be the most reflective body of the people, including the vicissitudes of public opinion. You may recall that originally the United States Senate wasn't even elected. States would literally appoint and send a United States senator. So that was by design too. They wanted the Senate to be kind of a slower, more deliberative, more insulated from public opinion, but they wanted the House to be the people's house. So I think it's a good term. I think it fits. Good conversation. Thanks for your questions. And we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Be safe and wear a mask. Stay home. Physical distancing. Avoid crowds. Stay safe. See you soon.